Whoa, check it out. Another really cool skull that I made in VR. I really love making these VR skulls, and I promise I will have a video about sculpting this specific skull very soon. But today, we're looking at the printers again. Yep, we're down in the print shop again because we're doing another mega review. We're gonna take a look at some 3D printers. In my first mega review, we looked at the Ender 3, the CR10, CR10S, all from Creality, as well as the AlphaWise U20. And the reason for that was because these printers were all so similar, so I kind of wanted to sort through and help you figure out which of those is actually the best for you. The 3D printer market is crazy. There's constantly new models, always new printers to make you regret your last purchase. But the good news is a lot of them are really good and you don't necessarily need the best printer. I still think the Ender 3 is the go-to right now in terms of I've never printed before. I just want a really nice, reliable printer at a really affordable cost. The Ender 3 is under $200 and that's about as good as you'll get right now for a really nice, well-functioning printer. I still recommend that for beginners, but today's video is kind of different. This mega review, we're looking at 3 printers that are actually all very different. And the point is to kind of show you why there isn't one best printer, because there's a lot of different things you might be looking for in your 3D printer, and that'll affect your purchase. So today we're gonna look at 3 printers that have some unique traits or just show off different things or different reasons for having different 3D printers, if that makes sense. Why don't we start off with the first printer that printed that skull. All right, I have a hard time fitting this into the frame. As you can see, this is a tall printer, and this is the FLSUN QQ. It's a Delta printer. It's $400, so in a similar price range as the original CR10. And so it's interesting to compare those two. The main difference here is that this is a Delta printer, and I don't deal with too many Delta printers in general, but I did review the Anycubic Capsule, and that one I actually recommended as my go-to printer before the Ender 3 came out and other similar printers like that. But that was a really solid beginner printer. And this actually, of the 3 I'm looking at today, this is probably one that I might actually recommend as a first printer because overall it's really nice. I wanted to talk about this one because it's a good way to compare Delta printers versus Cartesian, or ones that move on a rectangular axis. This one has 3 points that move, and it still moves along a Cartesian grid, but the way that it calculates its movements is different. It's not anything that you really have to deal with because the slicer that you program your prints on is what figures out how to move the machine. But the thing that's different about Delta printers is that they actually use less parts, so that's a plus, but the parts are actually less readily available. So doing repairs might be a little bit more easy and straightforward with a printer like the CR10 versus a machine like this, where things are simple mechanically, but complicated in the way that they function. For example, I used this printer to test out this twisty puzzle when I was doing my puzzle competition, and I discovered that the parts didn't fit together just perfectly because the printer was printing slight ovals instead of circles. And that's something that can happen with Delta printers more often than other printers, and there is a fix for it, but it requires going into the firmware and messing with that. It's not too complicated, but personally, I prefer not to deal with the programming side of things. It's not my forte by any means. So I guess I'm just saying Delta printers are kind of confusing. They're less intuitive, but for the most part, it doesn't matter because the software takes care of things. And it can actually be kind of cool. The way this looks while it's printing is really cool. This print head just looks like it's kind of isolated while these arms are moving around up and down, and it still has a controlled movement somehow. It's actually a pretty amazing feat of technology. That said, I wouldn't say assembling Delta printers is necessarily easier or more difficult than Cartesian printers. This FLSUN QQ actually arrives mostly assembled. You just have to attach the base to these side structures, and the top is super simple. It's like a 15-minute assembly. The only thing that I had to open this up for was to switch this from 220 to 110 volts. So I had to unscrew the bottom and flip the switch that lets it switch between those 2 voltages based on whether you're in the US or in Europe. From there, I just ran this sample print which came with the printer, and as you can see, it's really cool and super clean. Just look how clean that print is. And that's why I'm saying that this printer I might actually recommend for people who are starting out because the print quality on this has been amazing. The precision of the layers that this printer can get is about as good as I can ask for. It rivals pretty much anything else. The horns on this RAM were actually just printed at 0.2 millimeters, which is kind of the middle range of quality you print with, but it just looks so clean because of how precise the movement is. That said, the quality on this machine is affected a bit by poor cooling, I think it is. With this alien plant, the overhangs were quite a challenge. It did survive, but there's quite a bit of rough overhang on this, and there was also a lot of stringing, which is also something that can be an issue with part cooling. And this has 2 fans on it, but I think the way that the air is directed towards the prints just isn't the best. You could probably fix that with a little modification, just a little fan duct, which I'll have to do, but out of the box, I'd say that's the main issue. I've been working on the retraction settings to reduce the stringing, but I had the same problem here with this beautiful coral reef that I made in VR. This is a very complicated print, and I made it complicated so that I could test printers like this and see how precise they are. And like I'm saying, you can see the print quality here is just amazing. The layers are almost invisible because of how precise it is, but there was still some warping and a lot of stringing that I had to clean up. So this one actually failed because these tall corals got knocked over while the print head was moving, since there was some curling between layers. And that's something that'll happen when layer cooling isn't perfectly good. There's a setting in your slicer called Z-hop where when it moves, it goes up and then comes down again to avoid knocking over parts like it did in this case. And I could have increased that value and had this print successfully, but still it highlights the fact that print cooling could be better on this machine. That's one case where the CR10 I think is better, but in terms of just precision of the layers, this printer might actually be better. So it depends on what you're printing. That's why this came out looking absolutely perfect, but then certain difficult prints that have a lot of separate parts where the print head has to move around a lot, like the alien plant, like the coral, there you might see some stringing issues. That said, it's not too hard to clean up stringiness with a heat gun or an X-Acto knife. That's what I did with the skull here, and it turned out amazing. So this versus the similarly priced CR10, I would probably still go with the CR10 unless you like the specific benefits of this. So the benefits are, it's got a round build plate, which depending on what you're printing might be a more efficient use of space, but it also technically means if you're printing boxes and things like that, they're going to be a lot smaller. This has a 260 millimeter diameter print volume versus the CR10, which has a 300 by 300 square build volume. And when you're printing really large things, being a square is actually better, but for like vases and plants and stuff, this is a way more efficient use of space. So if you have a small space but still want to print pretty large, this might be a better option. The bed here doesn't move around like the CR10, so that saves a lot of the footprint of the printer. And in exchange, you have a lot of extra height. So if you live in a place where height isn't an issue, but table space is an issue, this printer is actually a reasonable alternative to the CR10. It also has built-in power resume function, it's got easy filament swapping, it's got auto leveling. I only leveled this once at the beginning when I first got this printer, and the prints have been sticking too well, if anything. So I've just been adjusting the Z offset to try to figure out the perfect offset for prints to stick, but not too much, which is always a challenge with build plates like this. Things stick really well, so I've had to use a lot of spatulas to pop parts off. But hey, that's pretty good. The main advantage of Delta printers, however, is that they can be fast. Delta printers are especially fast because the hot end is very light, the extruder is way up here and it has a Bowden tube pushing the filament through, which makes it difficult to print advanced materials like nylon or really flexible materials. This did handle ABS and PLA. An enclosure would have been nice for the ABS, but generally it prints easy materials easily. But since the hot end is so light, this thing can move really quickly. So on average, I run all my printers at 40 millimeters per second, and I actually run this at the same speed, but just the fact that it can accelerate a lot faster, prints still go a lot faster. and this could technically reach speeds up to 90 millimeters per second or even faster. So if speed is something that's really important to you, then this is one to go with. Personally, I prioritize print quality over just about anything else, so I print nice and slow. Anyways, that's fine. Let me just show you a few of the other prints that came off of here. I printed this Aztec death whistle, and this really highlights how good the precision of the parts is. Like, the quality here is amazing, and it's a death whistle. It's really cool, but I can't blow this too often or the police will show up. I also use this printer to print a lot of my Astrolabicon puzzles because of how precise it is. For parts like this, where there's not a lot of movement and you just want really clean layers, this printer did an amazing job. These prints just came out fantastic. As you can probably tell, I'm having a hard time comparing this with other printers. It's a different style, but overall, things work the same, prints come out beautifully. I have no real complaints about this printer, so yeah, it's actually a good printer. I would recommend it. Our next printer, however, is a much more interesting case. Look at this. This is a 3D printer, this tiny little thing, believe it or not. I actually find this printer really fascinating, and it's really interesting to talk about, especially in the context of this mega review, because it's clearly very small. A lot of the time, people are looking for the largest print volume to price, and that's kind of how they judge how good a printer is. But at $400, the same exact price as that FLSUN QQ we just looked at, if you look at the price per print volume, this is a terrible printer. But it's actually not a terrible printer. This thing is built really well. It uses linear rails in the X, Y, and Z axis. And linear rails typically aren't used for hobby level printers because they're more expensive, although they are extremely precise and extremely reliable. They will require less maintenance and things like that. So despite being small, there's some quality in this machine. This thing is also very heavy for its size. This is made out of solid steel. It's a super rigid body. And I think the real main use of this, or the reason that it's so cool, is that it's very portable. You can take this around anywhere, you can throw it in your car, and you won't really have to worry about something getting knocked off askew or like becoming messed up somehow. This thing is a beast. It's a tank. It's a little tiny tank. Now, it's got a removable bed. It's not heated, so no heated bed, and it's small. It's basically just for printing small PLA prints. This is basically the largest thing you can print on it. This is a Springo I made using Matter Hacker's neon transparent green Pro PLA. It like glows. Super cool PLA. Yeah, it's not huge, but look at the print quality. It's absolutely fantastic. Pretty flawless. And maybe you remember I used this printer to print the hangers for my overhead camera rig when my $6,000 printer couldn't do the job. This $400 printer did an amazing job printing those. It's strange. This is like an extremely limited printer, but it's so good at what it does. Here's that same coral reef, but much smaller. And as you can see, the quality is pretty fantastic, especially for how tiny it is. I also printed out an early version of my Caterpillar. This was my first version of this model before I refined some of the overhangs to print better, but it still came out really nice. So this is actually a really fantastic printer if you're gonna be printing small things like D&D miniatures or game pieces, things like that. It's still a little high on the price range though. Is it worth paying twice what the Ender 3 costs? I would say really only if you plan on moving around and taking the printer with you. If you want to print at a convention or at a farmer's market or something, this would actually be a fantastic printer for that because it's so portable, so reliable, so straightforward and simple. But, you know, it's one of those special case printers. It's really great, but also only great if it's exactly what you want. I love it, but I wouldn't want it to be my only printer. All right, finally, I want to look at this Qidi Tech X Pro printer. This is basically a MakerBot Replicator 2X clone, but it's come out several years after that printer and it's got some really cool improvements. At $850 a piece, this printer is a lot more expensive than a lot of the other printers I look at for hobbyists. So that's another reason that I'm showing it to you in this review, where it's a special case printer. What's awesome about this machine is, for one thing, it has a direct drive extruder. A lot of cheap printers will have Bowden setups because they're simpler and more cost effective, where filament is fed from a gear through a tube into the hot end, versus a direct drive where the gear is right above the hot end and pushes the filament straight into that hot nozzle. That's great because it makes it a lot easier to deal with flexible filaments especially, as well as just any kind of filament. Direct drive extruders are just good for printing with every kind of filament. It's got a full enclosure, great for trapping heat, great for printing with ABS, nylon, any other material that tends to have a lot of shrinkage and warping problems. Those are mostly resolved with this enclosed chamber. And I especially love that, hey, the top is magnetic, the sides are magnetic, the door opens like that, so it's fully enclosed, but it's also possible to access things from every side. It's also got a magnetic removable build plate, which makes it really easy to remove parts. It's sturdy, and my Replicator 2 was my first printer I ever had, and it's still alive after 4+ years. So this design is just a proven design that it's gonna work for a long time. But I have one problem, which is the same thing that was the problem with the Replicator 2X. It's the dual extruders. It's tough to print with 2 extruders. It's nothing to do with this printer specifically, but the problem is when you're printing with one material on one extruder, the other extruder is sitting there idly and the filament is just heating up inside the nozzle, and oftentimes it clogs, and that's what happened when I was trying to do dual color prints on this machine. Here was my attempt at doing a dual color print of the chromatic vase that I designed, and as you can see, the green clogged about halfway before I had to cancel this print, and I tried to do my geode sphericons as well, and those didn't get very far either. So I'm sure I could get dual color prints out of this with a lot of playing around and figuring things out. Dual extrusion printers, I would stay away from them if you're just getting started with 3D printing. There's other ways to get 2-color prints, like printing the 2 colors separately and gluing them together. Dual color printing is just still getting figured out, I think, in general, in the whole 3D printing world when it comes to hobby printers. That said, I've printed single color parts with both the left and right extruder. They both work really well. In that sense, it's kind of nice just to have a backup extruder on the same printer. But yeah, it's a really solid printer. The main advantage here is being able to print with all kinds of different materials. Here's a Make Anything stamp I printed for my packages that I ship out. And the stamp itself is printed with Ninja Flex filament, which is one of the most flexible filaments you can get. It's very tough to print. I have trouble printing with Ninja Flex on the CR10, on this FLSUN QQ, on most of the printers I have, but this printer can handle it because of that direct drive extruder. I was also able to try out velocity painting, where you get these really cool designs by varying the speed of your prints. There's great videos about that on YouTube. Tom Sandlander has one, I'll link to that. But look at that. This is printed in PETG, and it is stunning, stunning. I also printed these massive legs for my CR10 using ABS. These were designed by Augustine Flowistic, but these are ABS prints, and they were not a problem at all for this machine. Also, my phone case. I printed my phone case in ABS on this machine. It's got 2 colors, but that's just because I swapped the filament. I didn't actually use both extruders. But hey, that came out beautifully as well. So you've got fully enclosed multi-material prints. It's a bit expensive, but it's really good for that. All right, there you go. A very quick look at these 3 very different machines. I know I sped through things, but I'm just trying to give you guys my overall impression, my informal thoughts, just give you my honest opinions on these machines and why they're good and why they're maybe not so great for you. All right, so let's do a quick final run through. This is the FLSUN QQ. It's about 400 bucks. What I like about it, it's super fast, it's absolutely quiet, and the print precision is fantastic. The cons are that the print cooling could use some improvement. I think it can be fixed with a little bit of a fan duct down there. And also, I prefer glass surfaces to build tack, but you could always just put tape on top of that. It's easy to fix as well. So no real large problems with this. Overall, it's actually a fantastic printer. It rivals the CR10 in terms of cost to what you get. I'd still get the CR10 if you're going for the maximum build volume, if you want to print really massive things. The CR10 is fantastic for that. This can print nearly as large, but it's not the main feature. The main feature here is just ease of use, quiet, fast. The desk space it takes up is very small, but it is very tall. Beautiful prints overall. The Xinkebot Capsule. By the way, this machine has been rebranded many times, so you might find the exact same printer offered by a different seller, but the prices I think overall are generally the same. So this is the Xinkebot Capsule. It's a tiny, tiny machine, but it's a beast. So if you want something that's small and portable and won't break, then this is a fantastic machine if you're just trying to print small PLA parts. The Qidi Tech X Pro. This is a time-proven design. It works great. The dual printing I have problems with, and generally I think dual printing is always going to be tough, but this thing can print just about any material. It's fully enclosed, really nice to work with. The user interface is nice. Yeah, it's really solid jack of all trades type printer. The price is a bit high. If I found it on sale for $750 or $700, then I think it would actually be a really great deal. So there you go. What can I say? There's a ton of printers out there in the world, and most of them work really well. Where a lot of printers fall short is quality control is poor, so machines can end up breaking. These ones all seem really solid, and I didn't have any problems personally with them. So in that sense, they're good. If you're absolutely new to 3D printing, I would check out my mega review with the Ender 3. I still think that is generally the best first timer go-to printer. These are good for their own reasons, which hopefully I explained decently in this video. All right, thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate it. I hope I was helpful. Until next time, I'm Devin. This is Make Anything. Don't forget to stay inspired. Sorry, I don't have any big drums to bang on for this mega review. I do have Astrolabicon maracas though. It's decent. The sequel's never as good.